Hello, this is Dr. Ajaz, and you are watching AFK Newsroom. And in today's program, we are going to explore the backdoor diplomacy on ceasefire process between US and Iran. And uh, according to Fox News, uh, I have gone through a headline: "Peace in Pieces." So let's explore and break down the hidden factors behind peace in pieces. So let's discuss tonight a peace deal that was signed in the gardens of Versailles uh, is being tested on the streets of southern Lebanon hours ago. Switzerland's foreign ministry confirmed what negotiators had spent all day trying to avoid saying out loud. The next round of US Iran talks meant to turn a fragile uh, wartime memorandum into a lasting peace will not happen as scheduled. No new date has been set. So at the same time, the guns that nearly broke uh, this deal before it could even get off the ground have for now gone quiet again. Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to renew their ceasefire just hours after strikes on Beirut killed at least 18 people and pushed Tehran to uh, the brink of walking away entirely. So, tonight we ask the question in our title: is this peace deal in pieces? Or is it simply in the painful, messy process of being built uh, one postponed meeting at a time? Over the next 30 minutes, how a war began with the assassination of Iran's supreme leader arrived at a signing ceremony in France, uh, and how it nearly unraveled again within 48 hours. We will break down exactly what's in the agreement and why Washington's own vice president is now publicly rebuking its closest Middle East ally, what the oil markets are telling us, and what comes next if no Friday's no-show in the Swiss Alps becomes in a pattern instead of hiccup. So this is our in-depth analysis, and let's start our analysis of today. Um, exactly where things stand at this hour, because there is a lot of motion underneath of what looks on paper like a single postponed meeting. Switzerland Foreign Ministry says the planned talks between the United States and Iran, Qatar, and Pakistan, set for the lakeside resort of Virgin Stock, will not go ahead. The ministry's statement was notably uh, Switzerland's remain ready to host, preparatory work continues, and there is no rescheduled date, unfortunately. That absence of a date is the detail keeping diplomats up tonight. The immediate trigger appears to be overnight strikes in southern Lebanon. Israeli forces hit uh, targets after Hezbollah killed four Israeli soldiers in the south. The Lebanese authorities report at least 18 people killed in the strikes that followed. Other outlets are reporting numbers as high as 21. We will update that figure as it's confirmed. Iran responded swiftly, condemning the bombing and warning that its agreement with Washington is conditioned on a real uh, ceasefire in Lebanon, citing what officials describe as the very first clause of the memorandum both governments signed just 2 days ago. Now, here's the part that tonight genuinely fluid rather than simply bad news. Late today, Israel and Hezbollah agreed to renew that ceasefire. A senior U.S. official tells our newsroom's partner, reporting that the truce is back in effect following the fresh strikes. So, in the space of about 18 hours, we have gone from a deal threatening escalation to a postponed peace summit to a restored ceasefire, and the talks themselves are still on hold. Let's lay out today, hour by hour, because the sequencing matters. Overnight on into Friday, Israeli strikes hit southern Lebanon, killing at least 18. Friday morning, Iran signals it's delaying its delegation to Switzerland, citing Israel's campaign in Lebanon. Midday, the Swiss Foreign Ministry makes it official the Virgin talks are postponed. Afternoon, oil market react more on that in a moment. Evening, Israel and Hezbollah agreed to renew the ceasefire. That is a full day's worth of whiplash, and it followed an equally turbulent Thursday, which we will come back to because Thursday is really where this crisis took shape. Um, a quick market note because energy prices are this conflict's most sensitive nerve. Brent crude settled up about 0.9% today, near $80 and 57 cents in cents a barrel. A U.S. benchmark crude, West Texas Intermediate was trading roughly 1.25% higher, near 77.50. Traders told financial outlets that prices briefly dipped lower on news of the Hezbollah ceasefire renewal, relief that shipping risks was easing, and before claiming back up on the talks postponement itself. In other words, the market is pricing both outcomes simultaneously, hedging against a war that could restart and a peace that has not fully landed. And there's a political dimension brewing at home as well. House Ministry Leader Hakeem Jeffries used today's developments to renew democratic criticism of the administration's handling of the war, pointing to higher gasoline prices, a regional balance, and a regional balance of power, he argues, has shifted in Tehran's favor, and a price tag he put north of 100 billion taxpayer dollars. The White House disputes that characterization, and we will get into both sides of that argument later in the broadcast. For now, the headline is simple. Even if the situation underneath is it isn't, the talks are off for the moment. The Lebanon ceasefire is back on for the moment, and after the memorandum both countries signed less than 48 hours ago is facing its first real stress test. To understand how fragile that makes things, yet you need to understand how we got here, and that's next. To understand why a single postponed meeting in Switzerland matters this much, you have to go back to where this war started. Because this isn't a slow burning diplomatic dispute, this is a shooting war that began less than 4 months ago, and the peace process trying to end it has been almost as volatile uh, as the war itself. It's February 28th, 2026. The United States and Israel launched a sweeping joint air campaign against Iran, and the strikes killed Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, along with a number of senior officials, and destroy a large number of military and government sites. It is, by any measure, one of the most consequential strikes of military and strikes most consequential strikes in the modern history of the region. Iran responds with hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones fired across Israel and American bases, and the UN and at US allied governments throughout the Middle East. Within days, Iran moves to close the Strait of Hormuz, the corridor through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil and gas flows. President Trump's posture in the early weeks was uncompromising. In early March, he wrote publicly that there would be, in his words, no deal with Iran except, and this is a direct quote, unconditional surrender. That posture softened by early April as both militaries absorbed real costs and oil markets converged. On April 8th, Washington and Tehran agreed to a 2 week ceasefire mediated by Pakistan tied to reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and oil prices fell sharply within hours. Brent crude dropped by nearly 16% in a single session. But that ceasefire had a defect that would haunt this entire process: ambiguity over Lebanon. Israel's government said publicly that the pause applied only to direct US-Iran hostilities, not to its ongoing campaign against Hezbollah. Vice President J.D. Vance, asked about the discrepancy, acknowledged what he called a legitimate misunderstanding, though it was never fully explained. It was never fully explained how a misunderstanding of that scale occurred inside a formal ceasefire agreement. Israeli strikes on Lebanon continued through that week, including what was at the time the deadliest single day of the war in Lebanon. More than 250 people killed in one 24-hour stretch, according to Lebanon's health ministry. That pattern, a US Iran strike, moving towards moving forward, while an Israel Hezbollah track threatens to blow it up. The it is almost exactly what played out again this week. We are watching two rerun of April's central problem, just with higher stakes, because this time there's an actual signed document on the table. In mid-April, American and Iranian negotiators met in Islamabad, Pakistan. In the first direct sustained talks of the war, they came close, agreeing on the broad shape of a 10-point ceasefire framework, but couldn't close the gap on two of the hardest issues: the Strait of Hormuz long-term status, and Iran's nuclear program. No memorandum was signed. Within days, President Trump imposed a naval blockade on Iran, intercepting vessels entering or leaving Iranian ports, a sharp escalation that hung over the next 2 months of diplomacy. What followed was a grinding 2 months effort to translate that failed framework into an actual deal, punctuated again and again by violence in Lebanon, threatening to derail it. On May 30th, Israeli ground forces crossed north of the Litani River for the first time since the 2006 Lebanon war, a major escalation of the ground campaign against Hezbollah, and a move that drew sharp criticism from Tehran, is a violation of the spirit of any wider ceasefire. By June 1st, the cycle repeated almost exactly as it has this week. Iranian state media announced Tehran was suspending negotiations after Israel threatened a major strike on a Hezbollah and stronghold in Beirut's Dai district. This time, President Trump intervened personally, calling Minister Netanyahu directly. Sources described that call as heated, with the president using blunt language to express his frustration that Israel's plans threaten to blow up the broader negotiations with Iran. The strike was called off. Hezbollah agreed to a US brokered ceasefire proposal. The talks survived. That mere collapse in early June should have been a warning sign for everyone involved. In fairness to the negotiators, they used it. 2 days later, on June 3rd, Israeli and Lebanese delegations, who it's worth remembering, have no formal diplomatic relations with each other, sat down, sat down together at the State Department in Washington and agreed on a framework to implement a ceasefire, including what negotiators called pilot zones, areas where the Lebanese army alone, not Hezbollah, not Israel, would control the territory. From there, the peace accelerated. By June 11th, negotiators had narrowed remembering gaps, narrowed the remaining gaps on the realize of and on the release of frozen Iranian assets, the full reopening of Hormuz, and how Iran's nuclear um, program would be handled during a ceasefire period. A final agreed text was reached June 12th, and on June 14th, mediators announced the breakthrough publicly, a memorandum of understanding um, that would extend the ceasefire by 60 days while the two sides hammered out a permanent deal. Global markets rallied immediately, and oil fell more than $4 a barrel in a single day. And in a single session, President Trump posted online, "Ships of the world, start your engines and let's the oil flow." And then came the moment that gave this story its image, the only one you have probably seen already if you have turned on any news channel today. On June 17th, the on the sideline of a dinner with French President Emmanuel Macron at the Palace of Versailles, marking somewhat surreally, surreally the 250th anniversary of the American independence. President Trump signed the Memorandum of Understanding with Iran. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian signed remotely from Tehran, and it's signed the president told reporters as he left the dinner. I signed in Versailles. Iran's foreign minister confirmed the agreement had taken effect, with a spokesperson telling state media, now it is time to test the implementation. That line, now it's time to test the implementation, turned out to be almost prophetic because the test began almost immediately, and it's still underway right now, tonight, as we are on the air. So, what exactly is in this memorandum that's being tested? Let's break it down. That's next. Neither government neither government has released a single agreed official copy of this memorandum, which is itself worth noting. What we have is a US account read aloud to reporters by a senior administration official, and Iranian confirmation that an agreement is in effect without Tehran formally endorsing the American version line by line. So treat the specifics with appropriate caution. But here's what we know the framework covers. On the military and shipping side, the United States began removing its naval blockade uh, immediately upon signing, with a full end to the blockade within 30 days. Shipping traffic is to be restored gradually, scaled to prior scale to pre-war volumes. American forces are to be withdrawn from the immediate vicinity of Iran's within 30 days of a final deal being reached. For its part, Iran commits to ensuring safe passage of commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, free of charge and for 60 days, and Tehran has already suspended transit fees for tankers moving through the strait. On sanctions, the U.S. Treasury is to begin issuing waivers immediately for the export of Iranian crude oil and petroleum products, along with the banking, insurance, and transport services that make those exports possible. On Lebanon, the agreement is meant to halt fighting on what negotiators uh, describes as all fronts in Lebanon, which is precisely the clause Iran is now invoking to justify pausing its delegation to Switzerland. Now, here's what is not in this framework, and frankly, this is the more important half of the story. The memorandum contains no agreement terms on Iran's nuclear program or its existing uranium stockpiles. The issue that triggered this war in the first place is explicitly pointed to future negotiations during this 60 day with 60-day window. It says nothing about Iran's ballistic missile program, and it doesn't address Iran's network of regional allies, Hezbollah, the Houthis Houthis militias in Iraq and Syria, the very actors whose conduct is currently threatening to collapse the deal. But put plainly, this is not a peace treaty. It is a ceasefire extension framework that buys 60 days to negotiate the parts of 60 days a part of this conflict that are actually um, the hardest. The nuclear question, the missiles and the proxies, everything easier than that. Blockades, shipping, sanctions relief got done first. That is not criticism of the negotiators. It's often how these things work. Securing securing quick wins to build a memorandum towards the harder uh, conversations, but it does mean the document signed at Versailles was always going to be tested by exactly the kind of crisis we are watching unfold tonight, because Lebanon and Hezbollah's role in it sits at the center of the unfinished business, not the finished part. One more piece of context that matters here: Iran's new Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, who succeeded his um, father after the February strikes, issued a written statement yesterday approving the memorandum. But he was careful, even in approval, to draw a line, stating that talks with the United States do not mean accepting Washington's broader views. Uh, that is not the language of a regime embracing reconciliation. It is the language of a leadership trying to manage a deeply skeptical domestic base while still taking the economic relief on offer. It tells you something important. Even on the Iranian side, this deal has a built-in fragility, and any perceived American or Israeli overreach gives hardliners in Tehran an opening to pull back. So we have a deal with real, tangible provisions, but with the hardest issues deliberately deferred, and a domestic political environment on both sides where any spark in Lebanon can threaten the whole structure, which brings us to the spark that very nearly did exactly that this week, and to a rift opening up between Washington and its closest ally in the region. We will look at the next. Uh, the ways the Netanyahu. Um, if there is a single threat that connect nearly every near collapse in this peace process in early April, in early June, and again right now, it's the gap between what Washington wants from Israel and what Israel's government is actually willing to do in Lebanon. That gap became unusually public this week. On Thursday, at a White House briefing meant to showcase in the new memorandum, Vice President J.D. Vance, who has led the American side of these negotiations, was asked about Israeli strikes on Hezbollah targets in Beirut. His response was unusually blunt for an American official discussing Israel, and he called the civilian toll from those strikes not acceptable. He said that while Israel retains the right to defend itself, and itself has to, in his words, respect this peace process. That's a notable shift in tone from an administration that throughout this war has generally given Israel war latitude, and it didn't stop there. The same day, several minister headlines ministers in Netanyahu's government pushed back publicly, insisting Israel's military would not consider itself bound by an agreement it had no direct part in negotiating. Wence's responses delivered to reporters Thursday evening was pointed. He noted that President Trump remains in his assessment the only world leader genuinely sympathetic to Israel's position at this moment, and suggested that if he was sitting in the Israeli cabinet, he might think twice before publicly criticizing the one powerful ally his country has left. Uh, Read that carefully because there's real substance underneath the diplomatic phrasing. That is the American vice president leading Iran's negotiations on behalf of the president, telling Israel in public that its protection is conditional on its cooperation, and that is not how the U.S.-Israel relationship has uh, typically been discussed out loud, even during periods of private friction. The fact that it's being said publicly tells you how seriously this White House is taking the risk that Lebanon derails an agreement and it has invested enormous political capital into. The political consequences followed almost immediately. Vance had been due to fly overnight to Switzerland to begin the first technical round of talks. The meeting that's now been postponed. Staff and a small press contingent has already gathered at Joint Base Andrews. Dozens of American officials were waiting in Switzerland to receive him. Then Thursday evening, the trip was abruptly called off. The White House official explanation cited unresolved logistical hurdles. Multiple reports, however, tie the postponement directly to the unresolved Lebanon situation, with the administration calculating essentially that sending the vice president to sign implementation details while Beirut was still under Israeli bombardment risked making the whole framework look hollow before the ink was even dry. Meanwhile, on the Israeli side, the position has its own internal logic, and it deserves to be represented fairly. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said Israel remains committed to its ceasefire obligations, but has also stated explicitly that Israeli forces he will maintain what he calls a security zone in southern Lebanon for as long as Israel's security needs require it. Israel's ambassador in Washington re- reiterated with this week that Jerusalem remains firmly committed to an immediate ceasefire, while pushing back on claims from Hezbollah and Iran that Israeli operations continue after after his powerful ally his country has left. The political consequences followed almost immediately. Vance has been due to fly overnight to Switzerland, and now, meanwhile, on the Israeli the position has its own internal logic, and it deserves to be represented fairly. Prime Minister Netanyahu remains committed to its ceasefire obligations, and um, so you have two coherent competing positions. Washington's view a ceasefire in Lebanon is not optional context for this peace process. It is per memorandum's own first. The clause uh, precondition uh, embedded sided and continued strikes threatened to hand Iranian hardliners every excuse they need to walk away. Israel's view, nearly 2 decades of experience with Hezbollah, have taught Jerusalem that any security vacuum in the southern Lebanon gets filled by the very group it just fought a war against, and that a ceasefire cannot mean abandoning operational flexibility against an enemy that, in Israel's accounting, killed four of its soldiers as recently as this week. Both of these, both of those arguments are being made in good faith by people responsible for very different sets of risks. The diplomatic problem is that they are at the moment in direct tension, and the document signed in Versailles doesn't fully resolve which one wins when they collide. That tension is exactly why, hours after Wayne's remarks and the strikes that followed, Israel and Hezbollah moved to renew their ceasefire late today, a sign perhaps that um, Israel's government heard the pressure from Washington loud and clear, even if it won't frame it that way publicly. Next, what the market, the region, and Washington's domestic political debate tell us about how durable any of this really is. Let's widen the lens for a moment, because this story is not just about two postponed meetings. It is a live case study on how fragile post-war diplomacy actually works when the underlying conflict has not fully cooled. Look at the oil market as a kind of uh, seismograph for this entire war. Crude prices are still running more than 30% above where they sat before the February 28th strikes. Even after today's relief rally, and even after the sharp drops that followed the April ceasefire and the June 14th breakthrough announcements. Uh, every time Lebanon flares up, prices jump. Every time a ceasefire holds for more than a few days, they ease. And that volatility is the market's honest assessment of how unresolved this conflict remains, regardless of what any single signing ceremony suggests. There's also a domestic political figure. Uh, there's also a domestic political fight between brewing here at home, and it's worth presenting both sides plainly. Democratic leaders, including House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, are arguing that 4 months of war have left Iran's regional position arguably stronger, not weaker, pointing to a Tehran just secured sanctions relief and reopened Strait of Hormuz, while gas prices for American consumers remain elevated and on the Treasury has spent uh, well over the $100 billion on the broader military effort. The administration's uh, counter counter argument made um, repeatedly by both the president and vice president this week is that the inherited a regime they assess as um, having been actively building toward a nuclear weapon that the February strikes eliminated that regime's senior leadership and degraded its capability, and that a negotiated framework, even an imperfect partial one, represents more durable outcome than either indefinite war or a return to the unresolved standoff uh, that preceded it. Reasonable analysis and reasonable analysts on which of these readings holds up better over time. And frankly, we won't know the honest answer for months, possibly years. What both sides agree on implicitly is the things um, that matters most for tonight's broadcast. The success or failure of this deal now hinges almost entirely on what um, happens in Lebanon, not on what happens between Washington and Tehran directly. Uh, so, uh, this was almost for today, and keep in touch for more analytical views from my side. And stay tuned. Take care of yourself and take care of your channel. Take care. Goodbye.